Erev Tov Beersheva. Good morning in Santa Fe. My name's Wayne Firestone, and like many of you, I've got art on the mind, and we have quite a delicious topic for you to explore today with Gabriela Vainsencher, who is our expert gallery accompaniment, who has taken us to see some amazing artists. But we know that many of you have had a summer full of inspirations. We've got people calling in from Boynton Beach, Florida. We've got people calling in from Harlem, from Bergen County, New Jersey, not far from where Gabriela is today. And we're so grateful to have everyone here to explore art. So tell us about something that was created by hand, either your hands or someone else's hands, that inspired you this summer or over this Labor Day weekend. For those of you that are celebrating in the United States, we would love to know about labors of love that have come from people's hands. Did you see a photograph? Did you see a sculpture? Did you see a piece of art? Did you make a piece of challah or sweetbread somewhere that were inspiring to you that you want to share in the chat? So put something in the chat because certainly today we are going to see works created by hand, created by mind in all the senses. And Gabrielle, I know you always find an interesting mix of people who are doing really interesting things. What's your summer of creativity been like with your own works and what you've seen before we jump into the three artists that you're highlighting today?
Hi, Wayne. I love that. I love that preface. And also today we're looking at three artists who have really different approaches to making their work. So that's, I think, a great theme. I've been working in the studio. I've been working on some new large-scale wall-hanging sculptures. So I've been working with clay a lot. So that's been I've had very dry hands this summer. I've needed to moisturize a lot.
Well, we're going to get our hands wet today. I see some people have made homemade chocolate vegan granola, and that is their contribution from their hands, and others who have visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and other great galleries. And we want to encourage people to appreciate the creative process and to be inspired to get out and go see and support local galleries and art that is happening around them in their local communities, certainly. But one of the great advantages we have on this webinar series is to share things that are inspiring from Israel, from the United States, from around the world, and from our very experiences. So why don't we jump in, Gabriela, and take a look at the first artist.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. Okay, here we go. So we're starting from an exhibition that I saw this June at Hauser and Wirth Gallery in Chelsea. Hauser and Wirth is one of the biggest galleries in the world, and they have a whole building in Chelsea. And this was a show of artist Nicole Eisenman. What you're looking at now is one of the two floors that the exhibition was on. We'll take a peek at both floors. And this massive sculpture in the center was the centerpiece. And really, the sculpture is all about making art. So it's kind of a meta artwork in that way. It's an artwork that is about making artwork and is about the process of the artist. This is Nicole Eisenman in their studio. So Eisenman goes by, uses both they and she pronouns. So I'm kind of gonna skip between the two, just like they do in this presentation. And I think this gender identity is not only relevant to understanding Eisenman as a person, but also as an artist. So I'm gonna talk about that a little bit. But there she is in the studio. And I want to start from showing you kind of a close-up look of this massive artwork in the center. So when I went to visit this show, I took a video of it, which I think helps a little bit also because there's a kinetic element to the work. And I kind of go around it a little bit and zoom in. So we're going to look both by video and by image. So you can see in the center, it's a potter's wheel. The central artist is working on the pottery wheel that's moving. And the fingers kind of are working there a little bit. Eisenman considers this a self-portrait, even though it doesn't exactly look like them. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And that little bit of music you were hearing, like tinkling music, comes from a radio that was part of that show, part of that sculpture. So let's zoom in a little bit on this. So in the center of this sculpture was this massive figure of a sculptor with the potting wheel. And the sculptor, the artist, is surrounded by little sculptures. And they really vary in their technique and in the skill level from things that are really kind of put together like a hodgepodge. This is a sculpture made of pieces of wood, and they're put together with insulation foam, you know, the kind that you use to fix a leak in the radiator. Next to it is a wood sculpture that has a drawing that's been carved into it with a little rotary carver. So really this kind of level of skill that's woodworking, but that's also drawing. There's plaster sculpture and wood sculpture. A little bit looks like Giacometti. We're starting to see some kind of references a little bit to art history, and we'll see a lot of that in Eisenman's work. And if we go to the other side of this figure, here are two small sculptures that suddenly showcase Eisenman's hyper-realist sculptor abilities. So when they want to, they really know how to sculpt things and paint things very realistically. And we'll see this kind of level of using skill on different levels and mixing them together all throughout this exhibition. So here's a very realist figure of a person, but their head, you can see their head is kind of a little bit like a cartoon, and their fingers are a little bit kind of big fat fingers, but the pants and the shoes are perfectly made. And at the bottom of all this, there's little bits of clay kind of thrown on the floor. Those are also sculpted. There's some pita bread. I don't know if you saw there, also a sculpture. Behind the figure is a giant Heinz ketchup bottle, which of course is supposed to make us think about pop art, about Andy Warhol. In the center is a fake, don't worry, a fake piece of dynamite connected to a phone. It all feels kind of like a cartoon in a way, a cartoony world that has art references, that has art making on a very high level and also on a very low level. And this is the kind of world that Eisenman built around their work, where the artist is in the middle, the process is in the middle. There's a lot of different ways to approach art. There's a lot of humor, but there's also a lot of craft. So if you look on the right side of the slide, you can see kind of out of the corner of your eye the next sculpture we're gonna look at. Here's just to give you some sense of scale and the size of it. This is bronze, and we're gonna take a closer look. It doesn't look like bronze. It looks like carved and painted wood, which is on purpose. So Eisenman will make a sculpture out of wood and foam and all kinds of materials, and then she will make a cast of it and cast it in various materials. In this exhibition, there's a lot of bronze sculptures. And then the bronze gets painted again. And here you see bronze, and she made these kind of cartoon like glasses that are almost like a drawing of glasses on the figure. Here it is again. So this sculpture is something between a sculpture, a painting. There's some trompe-l'oeil techniques. Trompe-l'oeil in French means to fool the eye. So it looks like one thing, but it's actually something else. And has a lot of dialogue between 3D sculpture work and 2D painting work. And the sculpture sits in front, the wall that's in front of the sculpture is this painting, where of course it's a massive, huge painting of the figure that's in the sculpture. So we'll see a lot of this back and forth with Eisenman between the sculpture, between painting, between different levels of rendering an image, but the figure is always very, very central, the human figure. So before we go on, I want to show you a small video that I got from the MacArthur Foundation website. So some of you may have heard of the MacArthur Prize. It's also called the Genius Prize, that is given in many, many disciplines, among them art, and it's a very, very high honor in all the disciplines in which it is given. And I just got you a little excerpt from the interview they did with Eisenman, just so you can kind of see them in action, hear their voice, see how they talk about, in this particular case, the human figure. So 1.5 minutes with Nicole Eisenman.
My name's Nicole Eisenman, and I'm a painter and sculptor. I draw from the world around me, what I know. I pull my friends and family into my paintings. Sometimes I paint the world as I want it to be. I paint the figure because I know the world through my body, and I understand my desires and my anxieties through my body and the desires and anxieties of our culture. I think the body can hold so much. It can be a site for just exploring the paint in, or it can hold metaphorical and allegorical meanings. It's just wide open. I had 2 great aunts who were painters, and I grew up in a house full of their art. That's what I wanted to do. That's always what I've wanted to do. I get excited by the material, by the color, by the paintbrushes, by the little beautiful tubes of paint that feel so precious. I love the visceral quality of painting, of the connection between my eye, my hand, the paint, the canvas. And if that happens, that transference happens, that's magic.
So just a little snippet, so you hear the artist talking about their work with so much love and so much passion for both the what they paint, right, and what they sculpt, but also for the tools, for the paint, for the materials. And I think you really feel that passion in the work. I brought you some close-up images of this painting, just so you see it's all oil on canvas. And soon we're going to go to the second floor of this exhibition that's almost all paintings, and we'll really get to dig into the way Eisenman works. But you can see how luscious the paint is, how you can see sometimes really, really thick brush strokes and sometimes really thin, where you can almost see the weave of the canvas through the paint. And together they create these images that feel very sculptural. Look at the way this painting is put up. One painting is hung on the wall, and the one next to it is just kind of propped up next to it. Also a figure, this time more abstracted, almost a little bit cubist. And if we look at what it's sitting on little packets of the same clay that Eisenman used to make the, here, I'll show you, to make the clay blobs of the painting, of the sculpture of the artist. So it all kind of loops together. Here's another one of the sculptures in the show, just to give you a sense of the scale. Another head on a pedestal. And if we get closer to it, this is also bronze and aluminum. So the bronze is the head and the aluminum is the cigar smoke kind of twirling through the head and out of the head. And if we get closer, we see this time the original sculpture was made out of styrofoam and cut and hacked in styrofoam. And then the styrofoam was cast in bronze. So that gives us this kind of light, heavy sculpture, right? It looks like something very light, styrofoam, but it's actually painted bronze. And the smoke part, the aluminum part, is the natural color of the metal as it is cast. Eisenman works with a few dedicated assistants and studio managers who have been working for her for years. I know her studio manager. I went to grad school with him, with Sam, and she really employs people who really know what they're doing in terms of craft, both classical and innovative and new ways to cast, to sculpt, to paint, to mechanize sculptures. Here's Eisenman's signature on the back of the sculpture, kind of hacked into the styrofoam. Another version of this head motif, again, is in bronze and 3D printed plastic. So this time the cigarette smoke has been printed. Here, I got you a real close up. So we see the styrofoam that was the original sculpture and then cast in bronze and the 3D printed plastic smoke. So there's so much craft and so much really serious and very complicated ways to make work. But then the work itself always has this kind of funny, lighthearted, it both looks kind of like a nod to Cubism and art history and very knowledgeable and very well made, but it's also really funny. It's a sculpture with a sense of humor. Here's the back of it again. And as you exit this gallery on your way to the floor above to see the rest of the paintings, you'll see that Eisenman also exchanged the desk that the gallery worker usually sits in with a sculpture of their own. And if we get closer, there's a tip jar, and I was informed that they indeed sometimes get tipped, even though tip jars are not something that you usually see in fancy art galleries, but Eisenman decided to put it there as kind of a joke, but also a tribute to the people who work at the gallery. And the gallery worker told me that they indeed share the tips and usually buy pizza and drinks with them at the end of the day. I just thought it was funny to sit at a desk that's an artwork and spend your day like that. I think it's nicer than what they usually get. Speaking of money, Eisenman's work, she is one of the leading painters and sculptors of her generation, a huge inspiration to many, many other artists, and a huge favorite with collectors. When I was visiting the gallery, I happened to overhear one of the gallery directors talking to a potential collector about purchasing one of the artworks in the show. I don't know which one, it was in the elevator, but they said, so this work is 250, which I assume has 3 zeros behind it, but you can only get it if you buy another one and donate it to a museum. Just so you know how this stuff works at the very high level. That's sometimes kind of a buy one, give one situation that's very, very common in the art world. So that's kind of the sphere in which Eisenman's artwork prices are at. Here's the second floor of the gallery, which is the top floor of the second floor of the show, which is the top floor of the gallery. And I don't know how Eisenman got this this construction vehicle in the gallery, but they did. And we see in it a bronze sculpture of the head of her cat, which we will look at from up close in 1 minute. And in this gallery, there's a lot of huge, big paintings where the human figure starts from kind of 1-to-1 and grows to being a lot bigger than us. I want to zoom in on this painting on the left. First, I wanted you to see how it's hung in the gallery to give you a sense of scale. The human figures in it are about our size, are about 1:1. And it's a painting of an encounter, a crash, but also, according to the artist, kind of a meet cute, a way in which a couple finds each other for the first time. She was riding a bicycle. He was climbing a tree, I think, to save this little kitten at the top of the tree that you can see at the bottom top corner, and they collided. And there's something about this painting that's very surreal, really kind of feels like a dream. You can see the looks on the figures' faces. They're both very, very realistically rendered, but they also look like they're kind of not there. There's something a little absent. And the woman as well, we can zoom in on her a little. She has her eyes closed. So really they're dreaming. And look at the little kitten on the left. Kittens are kind of a recurring motif, kittens and cats in Eisenman's work, kind of a mascot in a way. Part of the function that Eisenman's assistants have in their studio is to paint details. So I know, for example, that the bicycle was painted by one of Eisenman's assistants, and the rest of the painting was painted by the artist, which is kind of a very common practice. Even the masters of the past, Michelangelo, usually the big masters of art paint the hands and the faces, and then there's an assistant that paints the sky, and an assistant that paints folds of cloth, and an assistant that paints food and pearls. And Eisenman has a little bit of the same kind of methodology in their work. A lot of portraits that become kind of a landscape, that become kind of a building. Look at the beautiful ways that Eisenman paints light and texture in this painting. We're going to zoom in on the area where the eye is kind of looking sideways. And look at how Eisenman makes the oil paint look sometimes like crayons. Sometimes we really see how thickly the paint is applied, but sometimes there's kind of a wash that creates almost like a light emanating from the figure. She really is a master of her craft. And you can see how basically it's a painting of a figure in a landscape, right? But when we zoom in, it's completely an abstract painting that just enjoys color and shape and composition. She's a really fun artist to look kind of closely at their work. The work also often has political or contemporary social themes to it. This is a big painting of one of the Black Lives Matter rallies at the beginning of the pandemic. And you can see one of the figures, if you look at the bottom right corner, you know, when we look at paintings from this period, 100 years from now or 200 years from now, we'll recognize that mask as having been a symbol of its time, right? Of the time where everyone was wearing masks, using masks even outside. So here he is going to sleep in the middle of the demonstration. There's lots and lots of figures in this piece, and each figure is painted in a different way. Look at this red, another sleeping figure, kind of makes me think of Gauguin's work, Impressionist and post-Impressionist painters. So what I love about Eisenman is her ability to be both really connected to the present moment and talk about the reality that we're living in and seeing around us, but also being very, very aware of the history of painting. And the last piece I want to show you from this show is the bronze figure of her cat. This is a 400-pound bronze cast of her cat's head that's almost sitting in the gallery like one of those wrecking balls, right? And I think there's a lot about Eisenman's work that has this, it's humorous, but it also kind of hints at a potential for violence or for danger or for action that will destroy something and make room for the new. So in that way, there's something a little bit subversive, a little bit political about her work while still remaining very, very playful and very much about the sculpture and the painting process. Look at this beautiful kind of scratched out texture on the bronze head. So this is Nicole Eisenman at Hauser and Wirth Gallery. I haven't been looking at the chat, Wayne, but if you see any questions that you want to jump in with before I move on to the next show, you just let me know.
Yeah, maybe just a quick one. We had a question from Deborah regarding your reference to the assistants that Eisenman works with. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't understand how artwork is created. Obviously, there's a first mover who is the master in this case. Could you just briefly describe, just so people have a little bit of insight into how those kind of collaborations and the people who are around the creation of a work that's as multifaceted and sure. Multi-material as Eisenman's work is?
Yeah. So I think the easiest analogy is the analogy of the film, of the movie. So we all know that when we watch a movie in the theater, there was a director, there was a writer, there are actors, there are makeup artists, there are cameramen. So in a way, I think we've all been conditioned culturally to understand that movie making, for example, or theater is a group endeavor where there is the director with the concept, there's the director who's in charge, whose film this is, but then the director can't do everything. They can't be the cameraman and the script writer and the leading man and the leading woman and, right? So in many ways, a lot of artists, but not all, work like directors. For example, there are artists who are not at all involved in the physical making of their work, but produce the work. They have the vision. They work with craftsmen and sometimes factories that make their work. And then everybody else is an extension of their hand, is an extension of their mind. And for example, Eisenman, can't cast a bronze, a 400-pound bronze cat head by herself, right? She has to go to a foundry. She has to work with people whose work this is. And historically, if we look at paintings and sculptures from the old masters' time, that is historically how artists worked. So once you get to a certain level where you have to produce many paintings, a lot of work at a very high level, the master would have retained the kind of privilege of painting the portraits, the faces in a work, and the hands often. And the assistants would be assigned. There would be an assistant that paints the background, an assistant that paints the sky, an assistant that really is good at cloth, like I was describing. Now, alongside that, historically until today, there are also artists who make everything themselves, who do not want to work with studio assistants, or for whom the work doesn't make sense with studio assistants because it's all about their hand, their gesture. So it really depends on what kind of work you're making, how important it is to you that your hand is necessarily in the work, that your hand made the work, or is the concept more important? And Eisenman is really a good artist to look at because they use they do everything. So there are paintings where they do every single brushstroke because that's very important. And there are paintings, for example, the Spike painting, where painting the bicycle wasn't as important to Eisenman to have it done herself than to have it done kind of perfectly and technically very correct. So in that way, having someone else paint the bicycle was more true to the concept of the work than having the artist paint the bicycle, because the concept was that the bicycle has to be painted in a very technical way, and the artist wasn't going to do that. So I hope that answers your
It's really a wonderful insight, and people are commenting on. It's not commonly known, I think, for many art people who appreciate art, what the different roles are people are playing. So thanks so much for that explanation.
Sure.
Eisenman's work is so rich. There's so much to talk about it with it, but I suspect we should move forward with our second artist, and we'll hopefully have some time on the back end to come back to some other questions.
Absolutely. So, in the next show that I think is really interesting to talk about in this context of who makes what is Barbara Kruger's show. This is what's up at MoMA right now. I'm not going to talk about the MoMA show, but I just wanted to tell you guys that there is an exhibition by Barbara Kruger at the MoMA atrium. I brought you two pictures from the atrium just so you see. For those of you who have visited the museum in recent years, you might remember you come in on the ground floor, and then when you go one kind of set of stairs up, there's an atrium that connects to all the different galleries. That's a double height, 2 stories tall, the ceiling is. And MoMA has been inviting artists to make site-specific work for that very tall, very special room that has lots of doors and lots of windows. And Kruger filled that space now. But alongside this show is the exhibition that Zwirner Gallery has organized for Kruger, which is what we're going to talk about today. That's kind of a mini retrospective of her work. And Kruger's work has been traveling to museums all over the world and the country in the past few years. She had a huge showing at the Venice Biennial. So we'll kind of peek into that. But Barbara Kruger is having a very big year for her work. She's in her mid-70s now, still making new work and also reprising old work, which we'll see a lot of in this show. And Kruger is one of those artists that does almost everything herself. Not only does she not have studio assistants, she doesn't have a studio. She has a desk at home where she makes all her work and has always operated this way. I brought you one picture of Barbara Kruger, and then I brought you a video to explain to you why we're not going to have any more pictures of Kruger herself. This is a picture of her from the 70s where she, when she graduated from Pratt, she worked for a minute in art spaces, which you can see. This is like a Soho gallery she was working in. But then she pretty soon got a job in advertising, which is where she spent a huge chunk of her career, mostly working for Mademoiselle magazine and some other ones of Condé Nast. And this is kind of where she developed her language. But before we jump into that, I want to show you a little video of Kruger. So you're going to hear her voice speaking. You're not going to see her face. And she's also explaining why we're not going to see her face, and also how she thinks about images in a way that I think is very, very important to understanding her work. So here's 1 minute and 10 seconds with Barbara Kruger.
People ask me all the time, can they come to my studio? And I say, oh, do you want me to put a beret on and you can photograph me with a big table? I said, no. No, I just don't want to be that person. There's enough visual record of me, you know. You don't need a million pictures. What it means to point a camera at another person, I think that there's a brutality about that. You know that women have served all these centuries as looking glasses possessing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its natural size. It's a Virginia Woolf quote. I just had to use that.
So that was a snippet from an Art21 documentary about Barbara Kruger, which you're really welcome to look up. It's a wonderful documentary about her work that came out a few years ago that has extensive interviews with the artists. But the first thing she says in that snippet I brought you is, you know, people want to come meet me in the studio. And I said, no, I'm not going to invite you to my studio. You're not going to get a picture of me in a little beret and working at a big table. She's describing this kind of mental image we as a public have of the artist in their studio. And first of all, her studio doesn't look like that because she works at a computer, and until not too long ago, also just scissors and glue and paper. She still works with scissors and glue and paper and a computer. And she works at home, and she doesn't have her picture taken a lot and put out there. And she says, I think that there's something a little brutal about photographing someone, about aiming a camera at someone and photographing them. And I think it's a very interesting perspective for someone who makes work that exclusively has images of people and text. We'll talk about the text, of course. And also as someone who kind of came up in advertising. So she kind of worked her way up in Condé Nast. She was kind of an assistant layout designer, you know, someone who puts the images and the text together for the magazines in a way that was supposed to attract the eye, make people stay on the page, use the models and their bodies and their faces as a way to get money, get eyeballs, get people to stay on the page. And she very quickly, through working in advertising, both understood the power of image and text together, their potential to be kind of a violent way of looking at someone or a very powerful way of drawing someone's attention and getting a message across. And what you're seeing now is archival footage from these week paste posters that she made. This is after she made the decision to leave the advertising world behind, the magazine world behind, and become an artist. And she makes her first and most famous signature work, Your Body is a Battleground. She makes this in the late 70s and offers it to Planned Parenthood to make a banner for them for a pro-choice walk on Washington. I know this sounds familiar, but we're talking about more than 40 years ago. Planned Parenthood had never heard of her by that moment. They already had a graphic designer, so they said, no, thanks, we have our person. So Kruger decides to go on the street and put up her work legally at night with her students from the Whitney ISP program. And she puts up this poster that shows the text, Your Body is a Battleground. There were a few versions of it, with a woman's face kind of split down the middle, black and white, and that text. The original poster, you can see, had more text on it because it was giving the time and the place of the protests of the March on Washington. And this became this work that we're also going to see a reprisal of in the Zwirner show. And what you see in this work is already kind of Barbara Kruger's language condensed. We're going to see an image that very clearly comes from kind of vintage print medium, looks like a magazine picture from the 50s. We're going to see that font that she uses, the Futura font, which is a very, very common font in advertising, and her palette, which is mostly black and white grays and that red, that kind of very basic red. And this all comes from the decision of becoming an artist after so many years in advertising. She said, I want to be an artist. I feel like this is where I'm at, but I don't need to buy paintbrushes and canvases and do the kind of, right, the Nicole Eisenman thing of like looking back into art history and working in that medium. Kruger says, I'm going to be an artist, scissors and glue and paper and magazines around me. This is how I'm going to be an artist. This is how I'm going to make work. It took the art world a long time to catch up with Kruger and to really take her work seriously as artwork. but she's now considered to be a very important artist of this and the last century. And of course, there's a lot of work that's very, very political, and a lot of work that's very kind of introspective. Look at this work, you delight in the loss of others. There's something kind of shocking in seeing this accusation, like you're the kind of person that sees someone else drop their drink and take a little bit of pleasure in that. And Kruger is kind of an expert of pointing out little ways in which regular people can be small, can be a little bit unkind, or maybe a little bit racist sometimes, or a little bit prejudiced without really realizing what they are and what they're doing. Another one of her very famous artworks is I Shop, Therefore I Am. This is the original image. This is how it's shown at the gallery. We're gonna see it in a moment. One of the things that also Kruger is very known for is being an artist that a lot of people borrow from or steal from their imagery. One of the most famous examples of this is the brand Supreme, which has admitted to basing its whole logo and its whole look on Barbara Kruger's designs. Of course, she doesn't litigate or go after anybody because she thinks it's kind of hilarious that people are taking her very anti-commercial work, for example, that work, I Shop, Therefore I Am, and then turning it into a luxury logo where you can buy a hoodie for $900. Here's another collaboration that Supreme did with Band-Aid for Band-Aids. In this room of the exhibition, Kruger has actually taken back from the people who have been influenced by her, or who have borrowed from her or stolen from her, depending on how you want to put it. And she dedicates a whole room in the exhibition to the people she has influenced. So you see the Supreme t-shirts and a lot of other kind of banners and Instagram posts and Facebook posts that people have made using her language. So everything you see here has been designed by other people and used by other people, and Kruger kind of took it back and showed it as part of her artwork. Here's a close-up of one of those walls. So I want to show you a few of the videos in this exhibition. For example, we talked about your body is a battleground, and I told you it's being reprised in the show. This is how it's shown. So this work is both a copy of the late 70s work and a new 2022 video work. So we're going to watch 30 seconds of this. It's shown on a big flat screen in the middle of the gallery. So this is a loop that kind of comes apart, gets blown apart, is put back together, and then we see the various versions of the text. So it goes from your body is a battleground. It switches between your and you and I. Talks about both images that sound violent or painful, to kind of accusatory statements, to confessional statements. Some of them are absurd. And here is make this video a little smaller. And here is the I Shop, Therefore I Am video. So you can see how this this kind of work is done in there's a lot of versions of the same kind of work where she takes one of her classic posters and turns it into a video, and then you can have a lot of variations on the theme. Some of the text work is shown as decals on the wall, and I think that there's something about the I or the we pronoun that she uses that makes the work kind of stronger. Even, you know, when you say your body is a battleground, there's something about like the artist saying to the audience, your body, your problem. This is what's happening to you, not to me. But when she makes a work that says our people are better than your people, we're more intelligent, more beautiful, God is on our side, etc., etc. There's something about kind of hearing that coming from the perspective of, I'm saying that, right? If I'm reading out this text and I'm saying that, feeling that kind of prejudiced voice coming from me, I think makes the political artworks that much stronger. And of course, there's a little part of everyone's mind that kind of believes a little bit in the home team, right? Like we got to be a little bit better than the ones right next door. And Kruger really exposes those sides of our collective personality that can be a little more small than we'd like to admit outwardly. And I think that's really what makes her a very strong artist. So I brought you a few views of some of her. I told you that there's been a lot of Barbara Kruger around the world in the past year. This is an image from her presentation in the Venice Biennial. And you can see it's English on one side and Italian on the other side on the column. This is in Berlin. It's kind of a, on one hand, it's a lot of the works are the same works, but they always get custom made, custom printed to the size and the shape of the space in which they're shown. This is at LACMA in LA, of course. The Art Institute of Chicago, which closed not too long ago, both on the floor and on the walls of the museum. And this is a work she had a few years ago on the High Line in New York, on the side of a building. So this is Barbara Kruger. When you can tell me if there's any questions in the chat, I should answer.
At the moment, more than questions, is an explosion of responses. People, I think, are really inspired and have a different understanding from your explanation of her work. I've seen one of her exhibits before in Washington, and for some people, just seeing text in this very large space can be overwhelming and hard to understand, you know, everything that she's crafting. But people really enjoyed, I think, the tour. Let's make sure we get to Parker Smith before we close out, and then we'll see if we have time for a couple at the end.
Okay, so I see people like Barbara Kruger. I think she's wonderful, and she does kind of cut right to the core of a lot of the issues she talks about. And I think there's something just so accessible and interesting in her work. Okay, yes, let's jump ahead to the last artist I wanted to show you. So I'm cheating a little bit this time because this is an artist from New York who shows in a New York gallery, and I know that's my specialty, but I had to show you Adam Parker Smith's show that just happened to be in the LA branch of his New York gallery. So you'll excuse me that I'm showing you an LA show, but it's just an opportunity to talk about this really interesting young artist who's kind of been coming up in the last few years in the art world. And for those of you who are going to visit New York next week for the Armory Art Fair, he has a huge outdoor sculpture there, which we'll see. So he is relevant to the New York art scene right now, even though he doesn't have a full show. And here he is with his dad, at his opening of his show in the Hole Gallery. His gallery's name is called The Hole, and they have that's their LA location. Now, before we jump into this exhibition in LA that we're going to look at, as you can see, a very white, very minimalist sculpture exhibition, I want to show you some of what he is known for and what he's done until now. And that is these kinds of sculptures. He is a master mold maker and craftsman and kind of comical sculptor. He makes a lot of sculptures that look like helium balloons and are actually cast in metal, in concrete, are then finished chrome, like cars can be. Also kind of similarly to Eisenman is an artist who both has a lot of humor in his work, but also a lot of references to art history. So this is a work that's made from aluminum, cast aluminum, and that's the balloon. What looks like a balloon is actually cast aluminum and then painted onto a brushed steel plate. So what looks like a mirror is just perfectly brushed mirror steel. And of course, it's titled Narcissus, after the mythological story of Narcissus. I brought you the Caravaggio version of the story, the man who has become so enamored with his own reflection that he drowns in the lake. This is another work by Adam Parker Smith called Nude Caroline, Carolyn in parentheses Contrapposto. And Carolyn is the name of his wife, artist Carolyn Salas, who is also a wonderful sculptor. And Contrapposto, for those of you who know, is the name of a pose that's very common in classical sculpture. The most famous example of is, of course, Michelangelo's David. And you see how he's standing with one foot, kind of the knee is locked. The other knee is a little bit bent, which gives him a little bit of a curve to his pelvis. And then that makes one shoulder higher and one shoulder lower. That is what's called a contrapposto pose. And if you see, he has made this bronze sculpture that looks like a beach mat take this contrapposto pose. So again, an artist with a lot of appreciation for art history, amazing knowledge of how to make his sculptures, and a huge sense of humor. Another series is his vases of spaghetti and tomato sauce. This is not spaghetti or tomato sauce. These are resin sculptures that are cast to look like spaghetti and tomato sauce, creating the forms of classical containers. So this is an amphora. We have a vase inspired by Meissen pottery. A Louis XVI vase, all of them made in this kind of Italian American, which is the heritage of the artist, kind of trope, right? The spaghetti and meatballs, the spaghetti and tomato sauce is kind of American translation to Italian tradition. And then he takes that language and puts it into a sculpture. Another series he recently showed at the Hole's location in New York is the sleeping bag series. So he had two inspirations for this work. One is really high-tech tundra level sleeping bags that you can buy at camping stores that really looked like cocoons. These are the forms that he used to make these sculptures. These are cast in, most of them are cast in metal and then spray painted or airbrushed. And of course, the second inspiration are the outer coffins of mummies, right, from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. So again, it's kind of old and new together. It's just to give you a sense of scale. You're looking at Kathy Grayson, who's the owner of the Hole Galleries. And here are his assistants at the studio. You can see the one in the foreground is working on one of the sleeping bag sculptures, and there's a man in the background working on the pool mat sculptures. The casts are so detailed, they even have zippers. Some of them have been shown outdoors as well as indoors. And for the show, just to give you, that's what Parker Smith is known for. And for this show, he turned to a new material for him, but a very ancient material for sculpture, and that is marble. All these sculptures are made from marble. And I want to show you where the journey started. I'm going to give the, you're going to get a link, a list of links and the show notes for what we saw today. So you can explore the artist's websites and the gallery's websites by yourself. And I especially recommend that you go on the Hall's website because you can take a 3D tour through the exhibition where you kind of walk around and you can turn the camera in all directions and see these beautiful sculptures. So the journey of the show started in Carrara in Italy, where the famous Carrara marble comes from. This is the quarry. Here's the artist in the quarry. And he spent all his time there creating these sculptures with the artisans who have been working with marble for generations in Italy. And basically all the sculptures are first, they take a block, a cube of marble, and then sculpt it. There's a small part where a machine sculpts kind of the outside lines that are based on digital renderings. I'm going to explain that in a minute. But most of the work is made by hand. Some of them by the artist, but mostly by the assistants after his instructions. And what they are, these kind of cubed sculptures, are reinterpretations of classical sculptures. So for example, this one is titled Ganymede and the Eagle, after this classical sculpture of a mythological story of Ganymede, who is brought to the heavens by Zeus in the form of an eagle that comes to kind of make friends with them and then kidnap him to the heavens to become the god's official food taster. And you can recognize, look at the jug that Ganymede is holding in his hand, this kind of pitcher, and look at his hat. Those are kind of very recognizable images, and look at the feathers of the eagle. And then you'll recognize them in the sculpture where Adam Parker Smith has done something like, he's like condensed them into a cube. So what he did was he worked with the collections in Italy where these sculptures are housed. He got 3D scans of the sculptures. Then in a computer program, he kind of condensed them in a cube as if they were going to get put on a container ship and sent somewhere, right? We're living in the age of Amazon where everything has to fit on a container ship and be shipped to us. He compressed them to a cube digitally. And then he had this digital reinterpretation of the sculpture sculpted in marble. So it's a whole process of going backwards in time, forwards in time, working in a very classical way, then working in a very digital way, then going back to the classical tradition of working in marble, which is a very hard and unforgiving material. And every single sculpture in this show is based on a classical sculpture. So this is the Apollo of Belvedere. And this is Adam Parker Smith's version. I brought you some images from the studio, from the process of making these incredible sculptures. The craftsmanship is really the kind of craftsmanship that goes back to classical times. And for those of you who are going to visit New York this week, you can see Ganymede and the Eagle in the West Village. It's being shown outdoors during the Armory show. You can walk right up to it. And here's one of the artist's assistants in the quarry in Italy. This is a a minute before they packed this sculpture up in a very square box and shipped it to its next show. So this is Adam Parker Smith at the Hole. And of course, Wayne, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll look at the chat as well.
Gabriela, thanks for introducing three fascinating and very different styles and approaches. We could probably do a full hour just talking about some of the themes and the ways they were represented in these three very different artists. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that today. We're getting some great reactions from people in the chat. I just have to give a call out for one of them early on, a gentleman who left his his career in high tech and is now exploring painting and sculpture. And so as I was thinking about your reference from Deborah Hunt and just working with glue and scissors and old school sort of images from advertising magazines, etc. Just how accessible really art is for people. Obviously, to explore the masters and someone who is a MacArthur Prize winner like Eisenman, what a fascinating work. Sculpture that looks like painting, painting that looks like sculpture. People have asked how you even chose these three particular artists. You could probably give a whole lecture just on that as well. We are so grateful for this exploration of these visual masters and for the reference points that you made, which we will of course share with a copy of this for all of the audience who wants it afterwards. And so thanks for packing so much into this hour. We look forward to these periodic gallery tours, and I'm glad we got out to Los Angeles. That wasn't cheating. We know that art is global now, and the exhibits, they may start in New York or end up in New York, but they really very much bring us and make us feel closer to it, no matter where it's being represented. So thanks for doing that and being so with us today.
Thanks for including me. I can tell you that I really recommend everyone to, once you get the list, to just go on the gallery's website. Also, those of you who like Instagram, especially Adam Parker Smith has an amazing Instagram channel where he shows a lot of the behind the curtain kind of studio process. That's really, really fun to see. So that was my last kind of art tip.
That is a great tip. For those of us less familiar with Instagram, it's a reason to become more familiar with it. And indeed, there's a lot of the visual arts that you don't get in some of the other social media that you can access through Instagram. But here on Zoom or Facebook or any of the social media channels that you're watching us with the America-Israel Friendship League, we make it as accessible as possible. We make it free for all of our viewing audience, so as many people can watch it. We're grateful that you're here. We're also grateful for those of you that support the arts and support great programming like what we have here at American Israel Friendship League, that you pay it forward, like the wonderful model that Eisenman came up with. Well, if you want to buy this piece, you have to give it back to the public realm as well. So we encourage you, if you like this kind of programming, to support AIFL in this webinar series so we can continue to bring you art, culture, music, history, archaeology, all the things we do week in and week out. Come back to us for our next episode is on September 14th. It will actually be in honorarium of September 11th. And some of the people who were first responders on multiple fronts during 9/11, we have a great panel for you, a very different vibe, but again, an example of the great collaboration and the learnings that come out of creation and at times from destruction. We hope that all of you will have a safe holiday weekend for those of you celebrating, and we look forward to having you back with us just in a matter of several more days. Leeds Road.
Bye. Thank you.